So when a huge construction project just completely goes off the rails, we're talking delays that cost millions, sometimes even billions of dollars. You know what happens next, right? A massive courtroom battle. And in that fight, the most powerful weapon? Well, it isn't what you'd think. It's not some smoking gun. It's actually the project schedule. Yeah, that document. So let's dive into how these incredibly complex schedules become the absolute key to winning these huge legal fights. All right, let me paint a picture for you. Imagine this, a brand new state-of-the-art stadium. It's supposed to be opening day, right? But instead of fans, it's just a mess of cranes and half-finished concrete. The project is a whole year late, and it's just bleeding money. The owner is pointing fingers at the contractor is pointing right back at the owner. So the big question is, who pays for this disaster? Who's legally on the hook? Well, the answer to that question comes from this really specialized field called critical path method schedule analysis, or CPM for short. The best way to think about it is like a forensic investigation, almost like a financial autopsy of the project's timeline. You have an expert who comes in and just dives deep into that schedule to figure out, what exactly happened, why it happened, who is responsible for the delays, and the most important part, who's going to have to pay up. Okay, so you might think you just bring in the expert and they drop this bombshell analysis, but not so fast. Before they can even get close to the witness stand, the legal team has to lay some serious groundwork. I mean, you can't build a winning case on a shaky foundation, right? And this is maybe the most important part of the whole thing. The entire case, everything, it all hinges on one question. Is the project schedule a reliable source of truth? Is it legit? So long before our expert gets to say a word, you need other witnesses, the people who were actually there, on the ground, to vouch for it. And these folks are called the fact witnesses. Think project managers, superintendents, the people who lived and breathed this schedule every single day. Their job in court is to get up there and confirm a few key things. Was the original plan any good? Did they actually use the schedule to manage the project? Was it even realistic to begin with? They're the ones who set the stage. They describe what really happened on the ground, giving all that critical real-world context before the expert even touches it. All right, so once that foundation is rock solid, then it's time. Time to bring in the star witness, the schedule expert. And there's actually a really smart legal strategy here. They don't have the expert testify first. No, they bring them in late in the trial. It's why they call them the cleanup hitter. Like in baseball, their job is to step up to the plate after all the other witnesses have laid out the facts and just knock the whole thing out of the park. So what's their mission? Well, it's pretty unique. They have to take all those scattered pieces of the puzzle, the stories from the fact witnesses, the piles of documents, all the technical evidence, and weave it all into one single story. In fact, a lot of the time, the expert is the only person in the whole trial who can actually explain the entire project timeline from start to finish in a way that makes sense. Okay, so the expert's testimony is a huge deal, but what makes it, bulletproof? What's the difference between an analysis that wins the case and one that gets absolutely shredded by the other side's lawyers? It really all comes down to this. Is the schedule they're analyzing technically sound and, believable? And there are a few key things that everyone's going to be looking at. Just take a look at this table here. A credible schedule, a good schedule, has to cover the entire project. We're talking design, construction, testing, the whole shebang. A bad one? It might leave out a whole phase, and boom, your analysis is worthless. It also has to have enough detail, it has to follow the rules set out in the contract, and probably most important of all, the logic just has to make sense. And this right here is a perfect example of what I mean by logic. Let's say your project involves building some brand new prototype control system. I mean, that's a huge deal, right? You'd expect the design and testing for that to be on the critical path. And remember, the critical path is the sequence of tasks that determines the project's end date. Any delay there delays everything. So if that crucial work isn't on the critical path, like you see on the left, whoa, that is a giant red flag. And you can bet the other side's lawyers are going to have a field day with that. And it's not just about the technical stuff. The schedule also has to pass what you might call the common sense test or the reasonableness test. I mean, does it actually reflect the real world? For example, you can't have a plan that says you're going to get most of your work done during a brutal winter. And you definitely can't assume you can cram, say, 1,000 workers into a space that can only hold 100. A schedule that just ignores reality like that, it's just not going to be believable to anyone. Okay, so you've got a technically perfect, reasonable, logical analysis. You're all set, right? Well, No, all of that is completely useless if you can't explain it to people who aren't experts. The real magic is taking all that complexity and telling a clear story that a judge or a jury can actually follow. And believe me, this is a huge challenge because this is what the raw data looks like. It's a nightmare. It's a web of thousands of tasks, all linked together with crazy dependencies and loaded with technical jargon. If you put this up in front of a jury, it would be an absolute disaster. It's just a meaningless wall of data to them. So this is where the expert really earns their money. Their job is to be a translator. They take that incomprehensible mess of data and they boil it all down into something simple and powerful, like this bar chart. Look at that. In one single glance, the jury gets the whole story. The owner costs 210 days of delay, the contractor caused 95. The underlying data is exactly the same, but now the story is crystal clear.
And that's the whole strategy in a nutshell, really. It's all about making it simple and making it clear. You use clean, easy-to-understand graphics, you ditch all the complicated charts and the technical jargon, and you just draw a straight line for the jury saying, this event happened, it caused this much delay, and this is the person who's responsible for it.
So let's wrap this up. When the dust settles, what does it really take to build a winning argument in one of these cases? Well, it turns out it all really comes down to just three things, three core principles. Think of them as the pillars that hold up the entire case. So what are they? First, you have preparation. The expert has to know every single fact backwards and forwards. Second, you need that solid foundation. That's what the fact witnesses build when they prove the schedule is credible. And third, and maybe the most important, is clarity. The expert has to be able to communicate it all in a simple, compelling way. When you get all three of those things lined up, that project schedule becomes one of the most powerful tools you can have in a courtroom. Which kind of leaves us with a really interesting question to think about, doesn't it? We tend to think of a project schedule as just a plan, a neutral, boring record of facts. But maybe, just maybe, in the high-stakes world of billion-dollar lawsuits, it's something else entirely. Maybe it's actually the ultimate tool for strategic storytelling, where victory doesn't just go to the person who's right, but to the person who tells the clearest story.